So, first of all, thank you for having me today for today's virtual conference. My name is Wu-Lin. I'm actually an undergraduate student from the University of Hong Kong. And for this talk, I'll be sharing a study that I've been investigating with the Shin Kong Memorial Hospital, actually in Taipei, Taiwan, which is the association of the consumption of different types of beverages and child stature. Without further ado, let's get started with the study. So before we begin with the methodology and reasonings behind our studies, I would like to first discuss the effects of sugary beverages. So as you may know, there are a variety of beverage types that are commercially available on the market, and many of which are sugary. So what is a sugary beverage? So these beverages have a lot of different names, like sugar-sweetened beverages, sugar-added beverages, but they all essentially mean the same thing. So as simple as the name suggests, it is a beverage that contains added sugar that can include sucrose, high fructose corn syrup, or beverages with the addition of juice concentrates. In this case, it does not encompass the beverages that are sweetened by artificial sweeteners, which we will get onto later in today's lecture. So as great as they might taste, these sugary beverages are proven to be quite detrimental to human health at all stages of development if consumed beyond the recommended servings. And past literature has shown to support this case. So these beverages are notorious for increasing the risk of obesity, tooth decay, attention deficit disorder, and type 2 diabetes. So the first figure shown here is actually a study done on young children in Canada, the figure on the left. As you can see, the regular consumers of sugary beverages have a much higher overweight proportion compared to the non-consumers. So the diagram on the right is actually from a longitudinal study in 2011 that followed infants over a 2-day food record and performed a follow-up study after 8 years. So this figure showed that for infants who consumed both higher sugar from beverage sources and high animal protein at infancy, 42% of the population was overweight after 8 years. So compared to intaking neither animal protein or beverage sugar, there was only 5% of infants who were categorized as overweight later on in life. So the results suggest that early exposure to sugary beverages actually increases the risk of obesity later on in life. So again, these are only two examples of the various studies being done on the effects of sugary beverages on the young children. And these current literature serve as an important premise for our study. Okay, so why did we choose Taiwan out of all the places to conduct our research? So other than the fact that the research team and I are based in Taiwan, it's actually incredibly easy to get our hands on all sorts of beverages. So according to our Department of Statistics, it is estimated that there are over 11,000 convenience stores on the island as of 2020. So in addition to the convenience stores, there's also a tea shop in almost around any corner as a result of Taiwan's rich tea culture. So this serves as an additional beverage source outside of the convenience stores. And these tea shops mainly contribute to the tea drinks included in our survey. So the number of convenience stores and tea shops will only continue to grow over the following years, and so would be the availability of these sugary beverages. So this growing trend could also be reflected in the subjects of our study, which are the grade 3 children. So in a 2002 Nutrition and Health Survey of Taiwan, elementary school children 6 to 12 years of age showed a decrease in the consumption of dairy products with age, but showed an increase in sugary beverages with age. So this trend in sugary drink consumption may also be attributed to the prevalence of convenience stores found here in Taiwan. So this is quite important to remember that there's a decreasing trend of dairy consumption with age, but also an increasing trend of sugary beverages. So this brings us to the next discussion point, which relates to the novelty of this study. So our study provides novel information since we have further classified beverages mainly based on two attributes. So other than just discussing sugary beverages, we have also included another factor, which is the presence of protein. So most studies focus either on sugars in beverages and their effect on the obesity, or the consumption of dairy products and the effects on child height growth. But however, this inclusion of both of these factors on child anthropometrics has yet to be done, especially here in Taiwan. Here, we present a study that incorporates both of these factors to evaluate the anthropometrics of the grade 3 children that include height, weight, BMI, and height and weight percentiles. So the classifications of the drinks will be explained in more detail later on in the slides. So therefore, in this cross-sectional study, we aim to examine the association of the consumption frequency of beverage types that children commonly drink with the anthropometrics of grade 3 children. So now let us move on to talk about the methods. So why do we choose grade 3 students in elementary school? There are actually two main reasons behind this. Other than the fact that most children at this age have a diet pattern closely affected by their parents, they also have the ability to buy a beverage themselves. So their consumption patterns may also be as a result of their own choices. Second, some girls aged 11 beyond have actually already entered puberty, which may lead to significant changes in the anthropometrics. So our participants were from 10 elementary schools distributed in the 12 districts in Taipei City from June 2017 to December 2018. And the survey contents were explained to children. The questionnaire and instructions were brought home and voluntarily filled out by the children's parents. So this survey was approved by the Ethics Committee of Shin Kong Memorial Hospital under the International Ethics Guidelines for Biomedical Research involving human subjects and the Declaration of Helsinki's Ethical Principles. The content validation was also examined by two professors to examine the relevance and clarity of the contents. Okay, so regarding the demographics information, the children's age was calculated from their date of birth. So the date of birth is quite important, since variations could potentially lead to a large difference in stature percentiles for even just a few months, as age differences are more prominent in children. The body weight and height percentiles also have to do with the age of the child, which are obtained from the World Health Organization, WHO's growth reference data for ages 5 to 19. And lastly, the BMI was calculated by dividing the weight in kg by the square of the height in meters to adjust for the heavier body weight in the taller individuals. So here's the questionnaire. The questionnaire distributed was actually divided into two parts. The part one includes the basic information the parents and children had to fill out, which also include the height and body weight of each parent. There is also the choice on drinks, which I'll elaborate later, and the frequency of drinking, volume consumed, and when the drink is usually consumed. So all of this can be used to gather data that will be aid in our analysis. So on the right, you can see the original Chinese version of the questionnaire, as well as the size of the 1 cup that is to scale on the physical questionnaire. So it's not to scale on the presentation, but it is to scale on the physical copy. Okay, so part two of the questionnaire includes the various beverage types other than water that are independent variables of this study. Beverages are categorized based on their contents into 4 large groups. So the first group are what are known as nutrition-only beverage, which is noted as N. So these beverages contain either animal or plant proteins, but no added sugars. So some examples I gave here include like the non-sugary dairy products like milk or yogurt, or plant-based drinks such as soy milk or rice milk. The second category contains the drinks that contain both nutrients, which is protein, and sugar. It's denoted as NS, which are essentially N beverages with added sugar. The third category includes sugar-only beverages that do not contain any sort of protein, but contains added sugar. So these include carbonated beverages, sugary sweetened tea, sports and energy drinks, or pure fruit juice, and juice beverages. So the latter two, sports and fruit drinks, are actually considered to be non-nutritious in this context, since they don't actually contain any protein. So finally, the last categories of drinks contain neither protein or added sugar, which are the nutrient sugar-free drinks. Examples include carbonated beverages with artificial sweeteners, sparkling water, or tea without any sugars. Okay, let us now move on to talk about the results. So here we can see our survey flowchart. Initially, 699 questionnaires and instructions for the parents were given out to grade 3 students. So the questionnaire was voluntary. So therefore, 124 participants have decided to opt out. That leaves us with 575 questionnaires that were returned, which is an 82.3% return rate. So after incomplete answers were excluded, a total of 515 students' parents provided complete information about their children's anthropometrics and beverage consumption, and the completion rate was 73.7%. So of the 515 children with complete demographic information, the parents of 389, 402, 417, and 451 have completed the survey for NS, S, and NS-free beverage types, respectively. Okay, let's move on to our data analysis. So here we choose frequency, which is the times per week, to be a factor to be used in our analysis. So we observed that based on grade 3 children, they often consume the same volume of beverage each time, based on our collected data. Statistical analysis were used based on the differences in distribution of our data. So if the data is normally distributed, this is actually tested through a KS test, which is the case for 3 types of drinks, 3 types of beverages, the nutritional and sugary, and non-nutritional and sugary. So we further classify them into these normally distributed into 4 consumption levels, namely no intake, tertile 1, T1, T2, and T3. So the intra-tertile differences were determined using the analysis of variance ANOVA, and this was followed by a Sheffield test as a post hoc test, or in other cases, a student's t-test. So in the cases where the data are not normally distributed, such as the non-sugary and non-nutritional drinks, the data was actually divided into 2 groups, intake and no intake. The intra-tertile differences were then determined using a Matt-Whitney-U test. So here we can see the characteristics of our 515 participants, including 262 boys and 253 girls. So as we can see, boys at this age are significantly heavier than girls by around 2 kilograms. And the weight percentile tended to differ. So as you can see, it's almost significant. It's 0.062. So because the body weight and the height percentiles didn't really, the percentiles are not significantly different between the 2 genders. So the data was combined to do analyses. Okay, and so this table shows the beverage consumption frequency, which I mentioned and are presented in times per week. So as you can see, there are no significant differences in the consumption frequency of each beverage types between the 2 genders. These are data only for the sugary, nutritious non-sugary beverages and non-nutritious and sugary beverages, since the non-nutritious and non-sugary drinks had low consumption rate compared to these 3 other types among these grade 3 children. So I'll briefly go over some interesting findings that are actually not shown on this table. So for non-sugary nutritional beverages, milk was the most consumed. For sugary nutritional beverages, the most consumed was sweetened yogurt drinks. And for non-nutritional but sugary beverages, the most popular beverage was sweetened tea. Now, this table again shows the data for the nutritious and sugary and non-nutritious and sugary beverages and the height and body weight of the children. So as you can see, children who did not consume any nutritional beverages had the lowest percentile of height and weight, whereas those in tertile 3 had the highest percentiles. And the height and weight difference between the 2 groups was 3.5 centimeters and 2 kilograms, respectively. But no difference was noted in BMI. So please note that both the height and weight percentiles were statistically significant, which is relevant and crucial to our discussion. So the consumption frequencies of nutritional and sugary beverages consumer did not affect height, BMI, and body weight. So consumers of non-nutritious sugary beverages tend to be heavier and have a higher BMI. So this table is actually really interesting. It shows the frequency of beverage consumption, who consumed or did not consume. So there's intake and no intake of the non-nutritious and sugar-free beverages, like I said before, like unsweetened tea or sugar-free soft drinks. So here we can see the children consuming these drinks without any sugar or nutrients were actually significantly heavier and had a higher BMI than the counterparts who actually didn't consume these drinks. Okay, so it is also noted in our Pearson's correlation test. We found that there is actually no correlation between some pairings of drinks, include the pair of nutritional and sugary beverages, as well as the non-nutritional sugary and non-nutritional and non-sugary beverages. But however, there is an interesting pattern to see correlations between the consumption of added sugar beverages. The two types of added sugar beverages, namely the nutritional sugary beverages and the non-nutritious but sugary beverages. So there is a correlation between the two drinks. So what are the implications of these data? So firstly, we did find out that more frequent consumption of non-sugary but nutritious beverages have higher height percentiles and body weight, but not the BMI. So this finding is accurate to previous literature, which stated that high-quality protein was associated with linear growth in children via improving the protein status and growth-related hormones or proteins such as insulin-like growth factor 1 and transferrin. So we speculate this intake may contribute to a child's total protein, dietary protein intake. However, this observation cannot be seen in children consuming nutritional and sugary beverages. So this could be explained by the added sugar diminishing the effects of protein. But no significant data could be observed for the case of non-sugary, non-nutritional sugary beverages. So therefore, further study with a larger sample size could be performed. So back to the 2002 statistic, the trend of underconsumption of nutritional beverages can still be observed in our data, and this is a problem that needs to be addressed. There's also a significant correlation between the nutritional sugary beverages and sugary beverages, just as I said before, which we speculate is due to the taste of these children preferring sweetened beverages in general. And lastly, it's interesting to learn that the consumption of the non-nutritious and non-sugary beverages is correlated to the heavier statures. So one speculation we had was maybe due to like the overweight children compensating their diet with supplementation of drinks such as unsweetened tea or sparkling water. However, there might be another consideration as well. It's actually having to do with the artificially sweetened beverages. So although the results of a recent meta-analysis is another study show that the artificial sweeteners might be beneficial for short-term weight loss, this benefit was actually not substantiated by the long-term perspective of cohort studies. So in addition, children demonstrating enhanced preference for sweet taste from a very early life can set the stage of the persistence of heightened sweet preferences. So even if artificially sweetened beverages are less unhealthy than sugar-added beverages, their frequent consumption may set children up for seeking sweeter and sweeter versions of the foods that will persist until adulthood. So again, these findings should be supported by further studies and the evidence. Okay, it's important to acknowledge some of the limitations to our study, as this study is only a preliminary approach to the beverage situation in the Taiwanese grade school children. So firstly, the study only considers beverages. It's not the entire child's diet. So in this case, only a minor proportion of the diet is composed of beverages. It is known that the children's diet is actually influenced by the parents to a certain degree. Therefore, it is also important for us to follow up on what solid foods these children and their parents also consume for their respective protein, fat, and sugar contents. So this is a possible further study and a limitation in our current study. So also at our sample size is 515. Our sample size is actually relatively small and only limited to a small portion of the island. And this could have many limitations to generate a really concrete statistical data. So additionally, the drinks children decide to drink are actually not mutually exclusive, meaning that one children could actually consume multiple drink types. That's very normal. It is also different to track each individual's drink proportions. We can only rely on the classification of drinks and how we separate the data into tertiles to give an overview of the data, so it's another limitation. And finally, I would like to talk about the limitations related to the cross-sectional approach. So yeah, there are limitations to cross-sectional studies. And I will talk about how overweightedness later in life is actually difficult to detect. So usually growth and weight gain have multiple follow-ups in a longitudinal study, but this is unable to be done with a cross-sectional study because this only gives an overview of the current scenario and some associated statistics. Now let us move on to some further research that could be done uh, based on our limitations and findings. So it has to be said, like aside from our limitations, this study is actually quite worthy to be done longitudinal for further studies due to the generation of novel and significant statistics that may be useful for nutritionists and policymakers and educators. So therefore, I propose several points that could be considered and investigated in further studies. So this includes the two factors I have mentioned before. So to make this study longitudinal by performing follow-up and incorporating more parameters that make up a child's diet, so not just beverages, maybe including meals and, for example, the protein content in meals. Yeah, other than these two, we could also incorporate the total protein amount as well as the effects of these individual beverages. But due to the scope of this study, these data were not not placed in the final version of our paper. However, we did manage to generate data that suggested non-sugary soy milk. So the non-sugary soy milk contributed to the most significant height growth. The protein composition and the types of protein, like the differences in animal and plant protein and how they affect child development within these beverages would also be something quite interesting to do further investigation with. Finally, I would like to also investigate some other factors such as the socio-economic factors. So the association between socio-economic and beverage consumption patterns has actually been reported in a past study. So for example, families with lower income and poor educational backgrounds tend to favor the consumption of sugary sweetened beverages. And there are actually quite a lot of variance in the socio-economic factors in these local public elementary schools. But this was not a factor actually present in our questionnaire. So this could be just another factor we could include in a further questionnaire or further studies on these pre-existing participants if we were to do further analysis. Okay, so to conclude, our results suggest that the non-sugary but nutritional beverages, so the beverages that only contain nutrients, proteins, but not added sugars seem to be the preferred choice for the high growth in grade 3 children. However, this generalization should be substantiated in a larger multi-site study, particularly in longitudinal design. So changing our design from smaller sample, local, and cross-sectional to something that has a larger sample size and longitudinal and non-local. So this result generated from our survey is proven to be novel and quite useful for nutritionists regarding the education of the children's growth potential. And this is the end of my talk. Thank you for joining me today and to let me share my findings with you. And yeah, thank you. Let me know if you have any questions.